Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, January 16th, 2025. This week, this Shabbos, we begin the second book of the Torah, the book of Shemot, Exodus, and this week's Torah portion is the Parsha, the Torah portion of Shemot. And it begins, Ve'ele Shemos B'nei Yisrael, and these are the names of the children of Israel, the children of Yaakov, Reuven, Shimon, etc. Which is very strange because we just had that full list 2 weeks ago. At the end of the Parsha VaYigash, we had the full list of Yaakov's sons. And it's the exact same list. So why is it repeated here when it was just written a couple of Parshios ago? There are a number of answers to this. But I want to share with you a classic answer and then a deeper insight into it. Rashi says, V'af al pi shemanan b'chayehem bishmosam. Even though 2 weeks ago in the Torah portion at the end of VaYigash, the Torah mentions all 12 of the sons while they were still alive, Chazar umanan b'misasan. In our Torah portion, the Torah repeats the same names, but this is after they had already passed away. Lahodia, in order to teach you, chibasan, how dear they are to God. Shenimshalu l'kochavim, they are compared to the stars at night like jewels in the sky. Shemot magnificence b'mispar uv'shemosam. That we go out to look at them, and we come back in, and we look at their names, and we try to count them. They're so dear. They are so dear, the names are repeated. Says the Sfas Emes, Lahodia, in order to teach you. In order to teach whom? For whom is this lesson about how that each of the sons of Yaakov is like a star in the sky? For whom? Who is God talking to? Says the Sfas Emes, He's talking to us. God is talking to you and to me. And God is saying, you are precious to me. You are precious to me, like the stars in the sky, and so valuable like jewels, that I want to remember your name and think of you on and on and on, repeatedly. God says to every single one of us that God cherishes us and appreciates us. And we're a star. We're a jewel. And God calls us by our names. So imagine this. Imagine that you have the chance that God is speaking to you, directly to you. And you have the opportunity to ask God directly, face to face, anything you want. What would you ask? What would be the first question you ask God if you had the opportunity? Imagine. Think about that for a minute. So in this week's Torah portion, God introduces himself to Moshe and says to Moshe, Moshe, I have a mission for you. V'ata locha v'eshlachacha el Paro. I want to send you to Paro. I want you to convince Paro to let the Jewish people go free, and I want you to lead the Jewish people out of slavery into redemption towards the Sinai and towards the land of Israel. That's what I want you to do. So Moshe asks God a question. And again, think, what would be the first question you would ask God if you had the opportunity? Moshe has the opportunity. God just introduced himself to Moshe. Vayomer Moshe El Elokim. And Moshe says to God, Mi anochi ki elech el Paro. Who am I that I should be the one to go to Paro? Mi anochi, who am I? God, Moshe's first question to God is not about God. What are you? Who are you? It's not about the secrets of the world. It's not about the future. It's not about the meaning of life. Those seem to me to be pretty good questions if I had the first opportunity to ask God a question. Moshe's first question is about himself. Mi anochi, who am I? Very curious. And God answers, Vayomer, God says, Ki ehyeh imach, I will be with you. So, that answer is a reassurance. I asked you to go to Paro. You say to me, who am I to go to Paro? So God says, I'm reassuring you. I'm coming with you. You're not going alone. I want to reassure you. I'm going to be with you. But there's a deeper way to understand this answer that God gives. The answer, in fact, is about the nature of being human. Rabbi David Wolpe writes, Moshe asks, Mi anochi, who am I? And God says, who are you? You are someone who can walk with God. Vayomer ki ehyeh imach. You, a human being, are worthy that I, God, should walk with you. God wishes to ensure that Moshe understands the majesty of being human. And once we understand that, the majesty of being human, and only once we understand that, then the theme of Shemos, of Exodus, of redemption, is introduced, and the process of redemption has begun. It begins with this understanding. God says to every single one of us, never forget that you are a star and that God cherishes you and accompanies you through life. That is the theme and the message of the entire book of Shemos, the second book of the Torah, the book of Exodus. Just to drive this home, you could ask yourself the question, if the book is called Exodus, which sounds like it means leaving Egypt, why doesn't it end with the Exodus? Once they leave Egypt, why isn't that the end of the book? It's not. It's only about halfway through, but why isn't that the end? Or maybe you could say the purpose of leaving Egypt was to be able to go to Mount Sinai. So why isn't the revelation at Mount Sinai the end of the book? But it's not. It's only about halfway through. Why would the book end with the building of the Mishkan, the sanctuary? Why is that the end? Why is that the fulfillment, the completion of Exodus and redemption? Because you remember God commands the Jewish people, this is later in the book of Shemos, V'asu li mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell within you. Not just a building. God is not just going to dwell in the building, but v'shachanti b'socham, God will dwell within us, within you, within me. The Mishkan is the actual representation of the nature of man. Human beings who can create a structure, and God will respond to that structure with v'shachanti b'socham. I will dwell within you. I want to be within you. I accompany you. I cherish you. That's the theme of Exodus. Mark Twain used to say, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And that's why the lessons in leadership we learn from Moshe in this week's Torah portion, starting in this week's Torah portion, the lessons in leadership we learn from Moshe are so important because they're not only a record of our past, but they are a blueprint now as we navigate life today. So I want to share with you tonight a crucial facet of leadership that Moshe demonstrates that is in such short supply today, but it is a critical aspect of leadership at every level. Leadership of a congregation, a community, leadership of a country, leadership of a constituency, leadership of a family, leadership of yourself in every single context. Excuse me. The Torah tells us that Moshe left Egypt as a young man. He went to Midian. He married a woman there. His father-in-law is named Yisro, and Moshe was the shepherd of Yisro's flocks. Moshe haya ro'eh est son Yisro chosno, Kohen Midian. His father-in-law Yisro was a priest of Midian, and Moshe was the shepherd of Yisro's flocks. Vayinaheg es hatzon achar hamidbar, and Moshe took the sheep far, far away, past the desert, in order to graze. Vayavo el har ho'elakim choreva, and he came to the mountain of God, which is Chorev. Later, this will be known as Mount Sinai, but it was not known by that at this time. So he's at this place. Vayikra elav Elokim mitoch hasneh. There's a bush. The bush is burning, but it's not being consumed. Moshe wonders about this bush. Vayikra elav Elokim mitoch hasneh. And God speaks to Moshe from the midst of the bush. Vayomer Moshe, Moshe. And God says, Moshe, Moshe. Vayomer hineni. And Moshe says, here I am. I'm ready to respond to whatever you ask, God. Now, in this first verse about Moshe being a shepherd, our sages find multiple qualities of leadership in Moshe, which lead directly to the second verse of God selecting Moshe as the leader of the Jewish people. And God did that by showing Moshe this burning bush, and then by speaking to Moshe from the bush. So Moshe demonstrated the attributes necessary for leadership. It's like the job interview, and God accepted and appointed Moshe for this historic role. Now, a shepherd is one who is constantly aware of the needs of his flock and connected with their welfare putting their needs ahead of his own. And that in itself is such an important aspect of leadership. We don't become a leader. Moshe doesn't become a leader for his ego, for his honor. He does it to serve, to take care of, to look out for. The verse told us that Moshe took his animals far away to be certain, our sages explain, that the sheep would graze on land that did not belong to anyone else, demonstrating an advanced sense of justice and fairness, another hallmark of Moshe's character and certainly necessary for leadership. God forbid that his sheep should take without permission from someone else's field. But our rabbis in the Medrash supply one more crucial aspect of this backstory, the backstory of what leads to God selecting him to lead the Jewish people. Our sages tell us that a sheep ran away from the flock, and Moshe was chasing it. And the faster the sheep ran, Moshe ran even faster to try to catch it and return it to the flock, because the sheep was supposed to stay with the flock. And finally, the sheep reached a source of water and, exhausted, flung itself down to drink. At that moment, Moshe realized the sheep wasn't running away. The sheep was thirsty and needed water. And so Moshe said to this sheep, I don't know if he spoke out loud or said it in his heart, but he said to the sheep, I'm sorry for chasing you, and I'm sorry for causing you to run so fast ahead of me. Had I known you were thirsty, I would have carried you in my arms to this water. And that's the moment God appeared and said, Vayomer Moshe, Moshe, and Moshe responded, Hineni. It's a beautiful vignette of Moshe's caring and tenderness. Certainly shows that he is qualified to lead God's precious children, to lead them on the journey, both geographic and emotional and spiritual, from Egypt to Israel. But it is also something much deeper. It's something much deeper that God sees in Moshe in this vignette, in this scene. It's actually something monumental. And it is absolutely necessary for the kind of leader God wants for the Jewish people. Because, you see, if a sheep is thirsty, it means that the shepherd is not doing his job. Moshe sees one of his flock not behaving as it should. And initially, Moshe thinks the sheep is wrong to run away. Excuse me. And therefore, Moshe runs after it. Excuse me. But what Moshe realizes is that if the sheep is not doing what Moshe wants, excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Moshe realizes that if the sheep is not doing what Moshe wants, it's not the fault of the sheep. It's his fault for not anticipating the sheep's needs. Every leader, every type of leader at every level, in every context, needs to develop within themselves the humility to at least consider, if my flock misbehaves, perhaps the fault is not within them, but within me. Every leader needs the humility to recognize his or her share in the shortcoming of the flock. And it is at the moment Moshe realizes this and starts on the path that will eventually lead him to be called by God the most humble of men, Anav Mikol Hadam. It's at that moment that God calls out to Moshe from the burning bush and selects Moshe as the leader, the worthy shepherd of the children of Israel.